Good afternoon from the Montana Digital Academy offices at the Phyllis J. Washington College of Education and Human Sciences at the University of Montana. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I'm the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of MTDA, and this is our Counseling the Online Student webinar, Perspectives from Both Sides of the Screen. This is actually a reprise of our successful Montana School Counselor Association presentation a few weeks ago in Bozeman, and we wanted the opportunity to deliver this to a wider audience than we saw on that particular day. We thought a webinar would be a great opportunity to do that. Please note that we will be recording this webinar. You'll get access to the recording later if you want to share it with colleagues at your local school, and then of course we'll post this at the Montana Digital Academy website. And joining me today for the webinar is Chrissy Murgel, counselor at Helena High School. Good afternoon, Chrissy.
Hello, Jason, and thanks for letting me join in with you guys. And for us here in Helena, we've been a part of using Digital Academy since the very beginning, so we're excited to be here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chrissy. So I would note to our audience today that we do have these slides available in an online format if you want to see them later. If you go to mtda.link/spring16webinar, it will take you to this screen over here on the right, which is the actual slides that we'll be viewing today. And if we get any questions during the webinar that we want to share information there later, we'll just go ahead and dump those into the slide. And please note that I will note this link to you later, so you feel need to write it down right now. But these slides are available to you if you're interested in accessing this content later. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual presentation today. And before we get started, I want to speak a little bit about why we're aiming this content at the school counselor. And most of our audience today, I need to get a chance to sneak a peek at the names of those that signed up for the webinar ahead of time. Most of them are school counselors, but I think that what's been a nearly universal experience at Montana Digital Academy is that most schools are spending their human resources by putting counselors as direct student support roles related to digital and online learning, whether it's our program or BYU or some other program in your particular district. And we really want to provide both some guidance and some discussion points that you as school counselors can not only use in your planning and delivering our program to your students, but we're also interested in having you have some information that you can talk with parents or principals, administrators, superintendents, special education staff, whoever might be asking your information about the Digital Academy program and where it fits into your local instructional program. So we really want to start this dialogue with you as school counselors to let you know a little bit about counseling the online student as it's particular to the Montana Digital Academy, but also a little bit about our program and how we may or may not fit inside your instructional program. So we're really happy you're here today. If you're listening to the recording of this later, you're always free to contact the Digital Academy staff. We'd love to schedule a call with one or more members of our Missoula staff to let you know answers to your questions or to help build some cognizance of the way our program works inside your local instructional program. So we're going to really break down our presentation today into kind of three parts. First, I want to talk a little bit about Montana Digital Academy's context, in other words, how we are funded and how we are set up to serve students through their local public school in Montana. Second, I want to talk a little bit about how you should be approaching online learning in your instructional program. In other words, as you're asked questions about how MTDA or perhaps any online learning works in context of a local school instructional program, what facts or information do you need to know in order to make an informed and student-friendly decision? And then last, Chrissy's going to talk a little bit about advising, supporting the online student both before and after their enrollment in the Digital Academy process. We'd like to walk you through really the whole span of thinking that might be a good part of supporting students inside this very unique environment. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to talk a little bit about Montana Digital Academy's context. Obviously, we are a specialized program. We are not a school, but rather we are a very specific role we might play in a student or school's instructional program. And let me talk a little bit more specifically about what that means. Montana Digital Academy is what's referred to as a state virtual school. And depending on how you define state virtual school, there's anywhere from about 25 to 30 states that have programs like the Montana Digital Academy. As an example of that, MTDA is part of a virtual school leadership alliance that meets with other state virtual schools that have similar models as the Digital Academy. And there are 13 other state virtual schools in that program that deliver in somewhat of a similar model as MTDA. Generally speaking, Midwest and Eastern school or states tend to be more proactive with this type of model as opposed to Western schools, although I can tell you that our neighbor directly to the west, Idaho, has a large and expanding state virtual school. It's a program we work very closely with, as does Arizona. And so there is a lot of cognizance on the part of the larger spans of states in utilizing a state virtual school. But there's probably a better name to utilize in regards to our program. We are not really a virtual school as much as we are a virtual supplemental program. And so that's an important distinction to make, because MTDA doesn't provide services as a school would, but rather as a supplement to your own internal program. As an example of that, MTDA's role is really to supplement and not supplant instruction. In other words, we were never intended to be a full anything for wide swaths of students. And in fact, we really aren't set up or funded to be in that role. We do carefully look at our offerings to make sure that we serve in a supplemental role. And although it's theoretically possible for a student to take all their credits with the Digital Academy, we are not set up to serve a student directly in that context. Not that we don't have students that do for a variety of reasons, but we really are supplemental and not meant to supplant. We also plan our programming and staffing around that model as well, as we do not have infinite funds. We have to then focus our attention on where we put our funds and where we put our resources in delivering courses. Speaking of, it's also important to understand that we do have just finite resources. We do get a lot of requests from schools to offer X class or Y class, and in a model that we're in, we only have a certain appropriation we get from the state every year to deliver instruction to all comers of students. So we have to kind of balance needs and requests we get from students and schools with the amount of funding we have, understanding that, like your own budget locally, that the vast majority of our budget goes to staffing, mostly teacher and instructional staffing for our program. And so we have to carefully balance how we use our resources and whether or not we're able to provide X class or Y class or what formats of classes we can deliver student instruction in. It's also important to note that we are not a school in the traditional definition of the sense, so we don't have any supplemental staff, no special education staff, no counseling staff. We aren't able to provide the types of resources that you do as a school, and that's why we maintain this relationship with public schools. We're a supplemental program. Students remain enrolled in their local school in order to receive services from the Montana Digital Academy, because in all ways, shapes, and form, you are the schooling program, and we are just a tool in your toolbox to be able to deliver instruction to students. Next, we also have the context that we're charged to use only Montana public school teachers, and that's an important distinction here, that it's not just Montana certified or Montana licensed teachers, it's Montana public school teachers. And so every one of our staff, we've had as many as 130 teachers working with us in any given semester, they are teachers from your school buildings. In any given semester, we have teachers from 35, 36, 37 different school districts, everywhere from the biggest high school in the state to the smallest high school in the state, and we deliver students inside that context. And that's part of the reason why we can only really be a supplemental program, because our teachers are busy teaching their face-to-face kids during the day and are somewhat unique in how they're able to deliver communication directly to students. And so we see this as a benefit. We love our Montana teachers. They are excellent instructors. They work very hard to deliver instruction to your students. Almost all of them have grown a significant amount to rise into this role. We very rarely get a teacher that's ready to go in online teaching, because the relationships and the teaching environment is so vastly different than their successful face-to-face classrooms. But we do love our Montana teacher model, and I'm very proud of our teacher force in Montana Digital Academy. And then one other thing to note is that we do very aggressively talk to students about what their experiences are in the Digital Academy. In the last 4 semesters, that's meant an every semester student perception survey, where we get the perception of students and their views of what's going right and what's going wrong in our program. I'm very proud to say that usually 80 to 85% of our student body, the current semester surveys, around 84% of students are satisfied or very satisfied with their Montana Digital Academy course. But more importantly, they provide us a lot of guidance that we use to both improve our program offerings and also our instructional program. And so we do work very closely with teachers on how to tweak this unique environment in order to make sure we're keeping in mind student voice in the way we plan our instruction and the way we plan around how to best serve students and their needs inside the program. And then the very last piece to keep in mind is that we are really used best as an option, where students are evaluated individually for their appropriateness inside the online learning environment. It's been our experience that while we do believe students should have a choice to take an online class as part of their instructional program in Montana, students should also have the choice not to take an online course. And in fact, students that are enrolled in any online course, and this is not just specific to the Digital Academy, but have no interest in the content, no time, no technical skills, the only way they're going to be successful is if there is a significant intervention on their behalf at their local school. And that's something very important to us to understand, is that online learning in itself, just like the generic face-to-face learning environment, is not engaging in and of itself. It requires building up compelling narratives inside of courses, but also understanding that it takes really a team effort in order to successfully deliver an online program to students. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So let's talk a little bit about planning around delivering online instruction. This is where you as a school counselor might be useful as a conversation piece at your local school related to delivering online learning as part of your instructional program. We find that there is a lot of misnomers about digital learning in general, but also specifically online learning, and maybe even more specifically the Montana Digital Academy program. So let me give you a couple of thoughts to think about as you're deciding where this fits in either your larger instructional program or in a student's specific life as you are enrolling students in classes. The first piece that we think is really important to understand is that students are really not oftentimes capable of taking online learning classes on their own unless they themselves are already successful students. And I'll give you an idea behind this. For many, maybe most students, it really does, as we say here, take a village to teach an online student. And so obviously we share a student when you enroll them in the Montana Digital Academy program, but there's really three pieces here that are all building a support structure around those students. Obviously the Montana Digital Academy teacher is important, but also the Montana Digital Academy help staff, which is we have 5 people in Missoula that man our help desk, that staff on the phones, that work on instructional and curriculum planning here at the Digital Academy program, and that's obviously an important part of this process. And what you may not see that goes on behind the scenes is that we offer we answer 100 support tickets each week where students or site facilitators or their parents need help in moving forward from a technical standpoint. And so we also build support structure around those students. But what may not be as obvious is that many students also need local staff to be successful inside this program. Not every student, not every context, but we do think that the local resources that need to be available for students is as important as whether or not a student is per se ready to take an online course. So let me give you kind of an example of how you might approach this from a philosophical standpoint. We have a really great document available to you. It's called an Online Readiness Matrix. And the Online Readiness Matrix is a really important way of approaching individual students to see whether or not that student is going to need a lot of support. Right? So what does that mean? Well, it means that local staff may need to jump in at some point to provide student services in order to be successful inside this environment. So what do I mean by local staff? Well, there is a lot of different roles that local staffing can play in order to successfully deliver this program. Obviously, by just role in a student's life, a counselor may need to assist in things like course placement, whether they're in the right format of MTDA course or reference to other resources locally. In many cases, students are on IEPs or have 504 plans, and if there's a special educator that's involved, access to assistive technologies, direct support, or negotiating what accommodations may or may not be available in the Digital Academy format. Obviously, in the credit recovery environment, we do specifically name a local support role and ask folks there to take a very proactive role in students, because we know absent that, those students just don't pass credit recovery classes. Teachers and paraprofessionals to do things like daily and weekly check-ins, help students access resources and a good adult presence. Obviously, technical support, having access to good quality computer resources to be successful inside this environment. And then, of course, your administration to be available to deal with when things aren't going right, including things related to episodic academic dishonesty, issues related to engagement, or helping us negotiate out when we have a tough situation involving a parent or someone else in regards to the program. And again, that local support piece is sometimes not as directly discussed as it could be when trying to plan a successful implementation of our program. And we really do believe that you don't plan this broadly, you plan this by student, because every student that comes to you looking for a digital learning opportunity is probably going to be a little bit different. And because the online learning environment can be so jarringly different than what a student's past has been in a face-to-face learning environment, that provides, we think, an important opportunity for those folks on the ground at the local school having the conversations with students and parents to look at each student as an individual and make determinations of which support they might need. As I mentioned before, we have a great tool for this. It's our Student Online Learning Readiness Assessment. We actually borrowed this from a good friend of the program, the Michigan Virtual University, which is the K-12 school, or K-12 virtual school that my boss came from in 2010 when he was the first employee of the Digital Academy. And this is a great way to kind of approach a student to think of if they will need more or less support in order to be ready for an online class. Technology skill, work habits, learning style, technology access and connectivity, time management, interest motivation, the reading and writing skills they may have, and also support services available. Depending on if they are more or less ready, they may or may not be a good candidate as an independent online learner. And so we encourage folks, you don't necessarily need to fill this out with every student, but think about how you might deliver this information to students, how you might evaluate a student. And if it looks like they're much more on the less ready side of this, if they have really no experience and little internet skills and they have lousy time management and they have little interest or motivation to complete this class, that tells you not necessarily that they would make a bad online student, but rather you would consider then providing more adult for that student, because the more issues they may have in taking a face-to-face course, for example, because their work and study habits are below their peers, or they have poor reading and writing skills, or they don't really have a motivation to complete this particular class, they will probably need more adult support locally than other students to be successful inside that environment. We think that's an incredibly important part of this process. And by the way, this document is available on our website on the same page where the entrance counseling forms exist, which is part of the process we utilize to give counselors great language to talk about online classes with students and parents, and that's available on our website, or you can always put a support ticket in. We'd be willing to direct you there. At this point now, I'd like to turn this over to Chrissy, who's going to talk a little bit about advising and supporting the online student both before and after the enrollment. Chrissy?
All right, thank you. So guys, I try to just really think of the biggest lessons that I've learned over the course of the past few years that might be essential for you guys to consider as you're moving forward with utilizing Digital Academy in your schools. And so one of the first things to really take into consideration if you're going to implement Digital Academy, whether it's original credit or credit recovery, is to figure out a policy of how you're going to implement Digital Academy in your building. At Helena, in the Helena School District, there is a limitation for students, and that limitation is that only 2.5 credits can come from digital learning that will count towards graduation. Students can take more than 2.5 credits, but when they go above and beyond the 2.5, it's just essentially for them for enhancement. It's not counting towards graduation requirements. And so making sure to share that with parents, that sometimes maybe reins in what it is that they're looking for out of this program, because really for us, we want our students to have the majority of their courses in the brick and mortar of our building if they're going to get a Helena School District diploma. If you don't have a policy, I would strongly consider working with administration to figure out what is going to work for you guys. The next piece would be to gauge student motivation. For us, when we first started using Digital Academy, it seemed as if I was enrolling a lot of students, not so much at their behest, but more because a particular administrator was wanting that for the student on their behalf. And it became quite clear that that expectation from the principal and really the need or desire for the student wasn't aligning. So in Helena, because we've had some great success with Digital Academy and kind of working through some kinks, where we're at right now is that the students, they're finding out about Digital Academy from their friends, and then they're approaching their counselors and they're asking questions about what it looks like, how does it work, and so that allows us to have conversations with them and use documents like the entrance counseling form and the Readiness Matrix to decide if it's going to be a good fit for them or not. So those students, we find, the ones who seek us out asking questions, those are the ones that seem to have the most success, and typically those are the ones that are doing original credit classes. And then of course, you know, when we're working with our students who are credit deficient, we're identifying the kids who are going to need credit recovery, and we're building in a period a day into their schedule so that they have some adult supervision. Of course, there's a requirement where they have to have a proctor for each exam. And so those students there may be finding success, but again, the ones we know that come to us asking about Digital Academy, those are the ones that typically they're passing with C's or higher. And this, because it is something a little bit extra on your plate, and we know that counselors have a lot of roles to play, make sure that you take a look at the Digital Academy website, because there are plenty of resources available to you so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Definitely take a look at that Readiness Matrix. I wouldn't send a kid out of my office without the entrance counseling form, and maybe it might even be something where you need to email it out to parents if parents have unrealistic expectations of what's being asked of the student. I found that oftentimes that the Readiness Matrix as well as the entrance counseling form, that's even in a sense saved my bacon a time or two, because I'm able to tell the parents, well, I explained this to your son or daughter. Yes, they have to maybe spend 3 hours a day in the summer on their summer class, but they agreed to this, and they knew this going into it, so it shouldn't be a surprise. This is a pretty big deal, and something that sometimes for me, it might slip through the cracks, so I have to be so careful of this, and I would highly recommend tracking this in a way that works for your school. But for our students that are on 504s or IEPs, it's no different for Digital Academy than it is for students in their own home high school. Those accommodation notifications need to be made to teachers that are face-to-face with that student. Those accommodations need to be made available to the Digital Academy teacher as well. And so there's a way that you can upload that paperwork in the Genius system, and that's definitely something to become familiar with. And of course, as you're going through the year and you're having those meetings for 504s, or you're having the yearly IEP, and when and if information about the accommodations change, then not only do you have to communicate that to the face-to-face teachers, but obviously you need to share that new information with Digital Academy and that particular instructor as well. This seems kind of like a common sense reminder, but they are taking a Digital Academy class, so you would assume that they would be doing things like checking their email. We know our students aren't typically without their phones, but what I've found is that not every student sets it up so that their email comes through their smartphone. Definitely they're getting their text messages, but maybe not their emails. Maybe they're using computers to have to log in and check emails. The other piece that I've found is that don't assume that parents are giving you an email address that they check daily. So when I'm working with a student to do the registration piece of it, I'm telling them this is an email address that you need to be using, if not daily, at least once a week. And same thing for parents. So a lot of times parents will give us their Gmail account that they only check occasionally, but maybe it's a state worker and that's something they're seeing every day. It's just a good reminder for parents that, hey, you're going to be getting a grade report, and it's going to come oftentimes weekly, and so if you're not seeing that, and then you're not logging into Genius, then you're not seeing what your student's progress looks like. So again, just having good 21st century habits is really important for a student to find success. The other piece to this, obviously, the lab requirement is essential for credit recovery students, but it's something to maybe even consider for students who are less ready on the matrix if they're taking an original credit class. I have a student this year that I found, she's actually really surprised me, and she's been quite successful, but I think a large piece of that is I was able to figure out a way to sneak her into the credit recovery lab. And so in her schedule every day, she has 50 minutes set aside to be working on her original credit class. And I think just being able to, for those students who might not have the support at home or who just might need a little bit more supervision, if you can figure out a way to build it into their schedule at the high school, then that's going to help them find success in the long run. So just oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, all the time, you really have to take into consideration each student and their situation. Everyone's so different. So you might have to go a little bit further for one student than another just based on home life situation. So as the semester is moving forward, some things to just really consider would be, one, to pull a report out of the Genius system. It's pretty easy to do. You can do it semester by semester, and it gives the names of all the students, the classes that they're taking. And the important piece to mention this is just that in Helena, a larger school district, there's one person in our building who's the site facilitator, and that's me. But I work with 3 other school counselors, and so they're not always seeing those grade reports that come to my email account. So for them, it's helpful to have this report, and that way they can just kind of bird dog their own students. It serves as a reminder for them that, oh, I need to check on Johnny and make sure that he's making progress with his Digital Academy class. So there are some pretty cool things that Genius has the ability to do, and so I'd recommend taking a look at that. And I alluded to the fact that there are these weekly grade reports, and those will come in email, which is super handy, and then that alleviates even having to log into the Genius system. And so make sure you're paying attention to those. And then again, don't assume that parents are reading them and seeing them. Treat it like you would a face-to-face class. So if you see that grade report come in and it's a failing mark, then be checking in with the student and making phone calls to parents. I've had a lot of success in communicating with the Digital Academy teachers, and I'm not afraid to reach out to them just like I would a teacher in my building. And the other thing is, like, if it's a student and I know that they're having a situation happen in their home life or struggling with peers or whatever it may be, if the student is open to me sharing that with their Digital Academy teacher, I'm doing that just like I would their Helena High teacher. And again, just being current with the emails that are going to come to you as the site facilitator. I would also recommend checking the web pages. You know, things come up all the time. There's always good communication coming from Digital Academy. Be familiar with when the registration deadlines are. When's the drop deadline? Another important thing that requires a little bit of legwork is, you know, right now we're in the middle of semester testing for our original credit students. And so they're good about making sure that well enough ahead of time we've got the information we need so we know which class is going to require a proctor and furthermore a password to access that semester test. So that will require a little legwork on the part of you, the site facilitator, but because you have it well in advance, it's not hard to be able to follow through and get that done. And then this is really critical, and I learned this the hard way the first couple of years of Digital Academy. You might have to pushback. It might be pushback on a principal. It might be maybe pushback on one of your colleagues, another counselor. But it's important to track student outcomes and figure out how successful were they. If you're continually trying to enroll a student and they continually fail, then I really think we're barking up the wrong tree. That's not maybe the best learning environment for that student. And for me, you know, in being able to track this information and percentages and grades, it was easy for me to be able to pull out my spreadsheet and tell that principal, you know what, here's Johnny, this is his past history, this is why I don't think we should try another class for Johnny. And just being able to see that information on paper helped that principal understand, oh yeah, you're right, let's try something different.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chrissy. I really appreciate it. I want to add one last note to that related to the tracking over time. It's been rare, if ever, that a student that fails 2 or 3 classes at the Digital Academy in a format then figures out the format and is able to then pass a class successfully. It's also true that if a student is not able to get up and running in the first 2 to 3 weeks of the program, will they then be able to claw their way back to be successful inside that semester? And so we try to communicate that information out. We certainly want to be as flexible as possible, but remembering that every student that is enrolled past a certain day is a cost of resource to Digital Academy. We do have finite resources to deal with. Will oftentimes intervene and warn and offer assistance, but then drop students who are just not making progress. And so it's important that we work together, especially if a student's presenting you evidence that they are not a great online learner, to understand that we may need to take more dramatic action on any particular student or another. So with that in mind, I'd like to open up to questions now, and we are using the GoToWebinar system today, which means questions are available through the question panel, which is in the GoToWebinar control panel. That's on your screen, probably maybe hidden behind the slides that I'm presenting today. I do want to bring up, again, the link, mtda.link/spring16 webinar will take you to a copy of these slides, which you can either review or download a PDF of. Feel free to do that as appropriate, but for now, I will just open up and pause for a few minutes for questions. Otherwise, consider the webinar is complete today. Thank you very much for your time. We know how valuable your time is, especially in May of the school year in the counseling office, but we hope that you receive some information about thinking about, planning for, and delivering Digital Academy services inside your school. So have a great afternoon, and we'll hang out here for questions.